Devin Carter out of Providence is this year's draft guard sleeper. This is Floor and Ceiling. Let's break him down. I think we should start with Devin Carter from 3. Now, this is not his best skill, but I think it might be his most important one in terms of why his draft stock has really skyrocketed this season. Carter finished his regular season shooting 38% from deep. In his previous 2 years in college, the Providence junior shot about 27% from 3. This was in his first college season at South Carolina, and then around 30% after transferring to the Friars as a sophomore. Carter's conversion going way up has really benefited him because it's not just the percentage, it's also the volume. Carter has already taken 223 shots from downtown this season, and he puts up over 11 threes per 100 possessions. Then, we also have to factor in the versatility of the shots he's taking. Carter can operate off the ball, as we've been seeing, catching and shooting, but he's not just a spot-up shooter. He can shoot some off movement and also receiving in transition. It's true that Carter has a slightly uneasy shot. It's a fairly pronounced two-motion jumper, but I feel much more comfortable with it given what I just mentioned. Then, the Providence prospect is also capable pulling up off the bounce. It's true that he probably projects as more of a catch-and-shoot guy. This season, about 3 in 4 of his threes are assisted, but make no mistake, Carter has some real range to his shot. At least as a junior, it hasn't been wise for defenses to go under on him. He's gonna have to prove this as well from the NBA three-point line and once he faces more length and size, but I do think these flashes are very much worth reading into. Carter is a creative shot taker and maker. He can pull up out of step backs or screens, and very importantly, I think he's shown a real upward trajectory when it comes to this part of his skill set. Still, I think it's fair to have some concerns about Carter's outside shot. Like I brought up earlier, his numbers in his first 2 college seasons were poor to below average. We've only seen a huge jump this year, and even though I think it can be backed up by the versatility and the volume, it's still a real possibility that Carter's average from 3 is closer to the low 30s than the high 30s. He also has the size of a point guard, being listed at 6'3" by Providence, so if he's a non-shooting threat in the league, it's definitely tougher at that size. As we've been seeing, the Friars guard has an unorthodox two-motion shot with a noticeable hitch. Once Carter has to get that off with less time on his side and more length in his face, that might become a bigger issue. Then, I think it's also natural to look at Carter's misses and notice that when his shots don't go in, they can honestly look pretty rough sometimes. I'm not saying that he's a bricklayer, he's definitely not. But one part of Carter's game that I'll dive into again later is that he can play slightly out of control at times. Right now, he's been the man at Providence, much more so after Bryce Hopkins got injured for the season. But once he steps up to the NBA, I think he's definitely more of a secondary or tertiary ball handler. That's going to mean a more narrow shot diet, particularly as a rookie, and less freedom to take the more adventurous threes that he has a propensity for. Ultimately, this might benefit Carter, but it is worth discussing for his eventual role in the league. However, for the valid concerns that surround Carter's three-point shot, I think there are absolutely no doubts about his toughness. The Providence playmaker is gritty, and his biggest selling point for me is how he plays a lot bigger than 6'3". As we're gonna see, this pops up really impressively on both ends of the floor, but focusing on offense, it's very apparent with how Carter rebounds. He's averaging nearly 9 boards per game, which is super impressive. If I had to compare this part of Carter's skill set to a recent draft prospect, it would probably be Brandon Podziemski, who also rebounded the hell out of the ball at Santa Clara. Carter averaged about 8 defensive rebounds, which allows him to kickstart his team in transition, and he was also good for 1 offensive board night. That right there is going to be really valuable for him for his entire career. The ways Carter plays up in size also show up with how he finishes at the basket. It's a somewhat similar tale to his 3-point shooting. Carter takes a lot of shots at the rim, he's converting them at a very solid 65% clip, and he's creative at how he gets these shots to fall. Carter is aggressive off the dribble with a pretty good, although not great, first step and handle. He's able to use a screen or take a defender on one-on-one, although it's probably not breaking them down off the dribble beforehand. The Providence guard is dangerous when he gets to 2 feet in the paint, especially given that he's willing to get physical against his defender, and also once he meets bigs. Despite not necessarily dunking on people, even though he does dunk a good amount, I think there's some explosiveness there with how Carter plays above the rim, and he glides to his scoop finishes, which he really likes. Carter has enough touch to finish from difficult angles, and he's also smart at using the glass to his advantage. All of this is really clear in transition, which NBA teams are sure to like, since the league is all about having guys who can get a rebound, something which Carter also excels at, and then pushing it on the break themselves. Once he gets drafted, he'll probably get more chances to do this, since the pace of the league is just a lot higher than what we see in college hoops. And finally, it's worth noting that Carter goes to the free throw line 5 times a night, and he knocks those down at a 75% clip. In terms of concerns at the rim, I think the biggest one again is how Carter has a slight propensity to get out of control. This is not as obvious when he's up against a set defense, but it's much more notable when he's jetting down the floor in the open court. Carter can still get better and more consistent at slowing down sometimes, even if he is generally pretty creative at changing the length and cadence of his dribbles. His handle as a whole can keep growing so that it's more useful at creating space against defenders. I don't think Carter is quite there just yet. Then, despite his long arms and his toughness, he only has okay positional size at 6'3". Even though Carter is long, if he's up against bigger defenders with even more length, he can still improve. In particular, I'm looking at diversifying his finishing package. Like I mentioned earlier, Carter loves to turn to an underhand scoop finish, but I also think he's a little bit too reliant on that. This is going to be important in the NBA, given how many bigs he'll face in drop coverage who are bigger than the defenders he's encountered so far in college. As for improvement points or holes in his game as a scorer, I don't really trust Carter from the mid-range. To be fair, this is only a tiny part of his game. Only about 12% of his shots fall into this category, but he's shooting just 29% here. Like I said, Carter's handle can still improve, and he's unlikely to break defenders down off the dribble right now, so this does not lend itself to pulling up off the bounce. The flashes I slightly prefer are when Carter drives into a turnaround 2 as more of a counter for when he gets cut off at the rim, but that's something that's pretty specific. Along with that, I'm not sure how many of these reps in the post Carter is going to get at the next level. I think his game lends itself better to starting off the ball, and his on-ball reps should be kept on the briefer side rather than accumulating a lot of touches. So I think these post-ups will get cut out sooner rather than later. Something I hope does get tapped into more though is Carter as a cutter. The Providence playmaker should get these chances in the NBA, since he'll probably always be next to another initiator who draws more attention than him. Carter moves well off the ball, we saw that earlier with his 3-point shooting, and he gets the most out of his length, athleticism, and toughness. Diving into Carter's passing, this is what keeps me from considering him as more of a primary ball handler. To be fair, he's averaged 3.6 assists to 2.7 turnovers, that's respectable, but I'm much more focused on the reads and the process. At this stage, I think Carter is best at making more straightforward drive and kick passes. Once he gets downhill, he's not easy to stay in front of, so he gets paint touches and uses the attention he creates to find open shooters. More often than not, the shots he creates come from downtown, so that's encouraging to see. Don't get me wrong at all, these are useful passes, but I also think they're not overly nuanced. Plenty of times, Carter is kicking it out to the strong side and creating a solid look, but I just don't see him as a guard who really bends the defense with how he facilitates. In the future, I'm hoping to see more passes like these, and for Carter to get more comfortable using screens to playmake rather than to score. Still, what we've been seeing is all complementary with his three-point shooting. Carter is going to be able to attack a closeout and make a decision from there. This also goes with his driving game. He can use a screen or attack a defender off the bounce, and rather than look to score, he can then look for the pass. We've already seen that this season, and those lanes should be there for him unless there's a big regression with his shot. I think all of these improvement points show up in Carter's turnovers. These are not alarming. He averages a little over 2.5 turnovers, and it's not like he's prone to losing the ball or anything, but it's more so about the limits that his playmaking has. Carter has some avoidable turnovers, which draw me away from the idea of him being a point guard. Again, I see him as much more of a secondary guard, and I don't think you can rely on him to make more advanced reads. Of course, there can always be improvement, but Carter is going to be 22 come draft time, and these do not come naturally to him. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it does establish a more clear floor and ceiling to his NBA outlook for me. Devin Carter looks great defensively, and the most important thing is that the Providence prospect excels at navigating picks with his technique, length, and mobility. It's really tough for Carter to die on a screen, and he'll almost always come out on the other side and get back in front of the ball handler. This is really valuable in the NBA since it's such a pick and roll heavy league. Again, I just love how Carter plays much bigger than 6'3". He's constantly getting stops or creating events on this side of the ball. Going beyond his technique, it's also a matter of production, and that is definitely there for Carter. The Providence guard averaged almost 2 steals and 1 block per game, with some very impressive steal and block rates to back this up. Carter can block drives and threes, he can blow up actions, and he can force defenders to kill their handle and pass it off. His length just shows up everywhere on defense, and despite his listed height of 6'3", he's a genuinely switchable defender who I think is going to be able to bother NBA wings. He's not Patrick Beverley as a prospect, but he is that type of pesky defender who could get some of those same challenging assignments down the line. If in a few years down the road, I saw Carter guarding a Jaylen Brown, a Trae Young, or a Tyrese Halliburton all the same, I would not be at all surprised. The biggest area of growth for him, and really it's not even that significant, is probably containing himself a little bit more at times. Carter is not foul prone. In fact, he's actually cut down on his fouls every season in college so far, but sometimes he can be a little bit handsy or overeager to make a play. However, my concern there is really small. Once he overcomes the NBA defense learning curve, I think he's truly going to be a great asset on this side of the ball. I'm looking at Devin Carter right outside the lottery in the middle of the first round. He's a fun player to watch with his toughness, rebounding, defense, and three-point shooting, but I also have some concerns about how real his shot actually is, as well as his handle and passing still being somewhat basic. Still, he profiles as someone who's going to be a great fit next to other players who are the stars of the NBA, and I think we should be looking at him kind of like this cycle's Brandon Podziemski. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a comment telling me what you think of Devin Carter, and if you enjoy the channel, if you want to watch more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Take care, and I'll catch you guys next time.